your official home for Beavers sports. On the campus of Bemidji State University, this is The Huddle with Zach Lunt and Dan Amundsen. The Huddle.
Welcome to The Huddle. I'm your host, Zachary Lunt. Co-host over here, Dan Amundsen.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Good.
Kind of a muggy weather out, I guess. But,
but your birthday's coming up, so it's going to be fun.
That's true, my 21st
21.
birthday. All right, well, let's get into some soccer here. So the soccer team is on a 2-game losing streak. They lost their first game against Grand Valley 2-0, and then they lost against Central Missouri 1-0. And actually, that was actually went into OT. Yep. Should we be worried about the soccer team, though, with a 2-game losing streak right here?
I don't think so. I mean, you want to win those games, yeah. It would have been really nice to come out and prove to them that they can win against the number 1 and number 4 teams in the country, except Grand Valley was number 1 and Central Missouri is number 4. That would have been really nice because last year we would have kind of not expected, but really thought Bemidji had a good chance to win those games. And so if you were going to try and prove to yourself that you were going to be that same kind of team as you were last year, it would have been nice to win those games. But it's very early, and playing really good teams early will help you be better in the long run. You know, you get better by playing better teams, and that's a problem we're actually going to see with this football team in my eyes, and we can talk about this a little later, but football teams played some pretty soft teams right early on, and now they're going to get some tougher opponents later on in the year. And if the soccer team does that, it's going to be harder for them to beat those tougher teams. If you play a tougher team earlier, it's going to be easier down the road. You're going to be more prepared for that. So ultimately, playing these two teams was better, even though they lost. I think it's a good thing.
Especially for scheduling reasoning. Yeah. Instead of having to play the tough teams to make yourself to get to playoffs, instead maybe you have to beat the not so tough teams to make playoffs instead. So I mean, we'll see how that works for the soccer team. Obviously, we talked about off screen possibly was about what the team was gonna be like record wise. I obviously lost. I thought they were only gonna lose one game because I was being a little, just trying to hype it up over here. Yeah, you should have made the bet. BSU's on 2-game losing streak here, and I've already lost that bet already. So
any more bets you want to make? I'll take them right now.
Right. Oh man. Well, maybe the football team. You think they'll make playoffs?
We'll see.
Okay.
We'll see.
Okay. All right, well, let's get into the football team, what we're talking about here. BSU just beat UMary this last week, 52-7. Is that pretty impressive win there from Beavers, or is this kind of, we should have expected this happening?
We kind of expected it. Now, there were a couple different factors that make it a little more impressive. So Jared Henning played instead of Brandon Alt, which none of us knew why until after the game. It sounds like they held him out for medical issues, which is all they said, which I'm starting to get a little tired of the staff being quite vague. They were pretty vague with his injury last year. Now they're vague with this. Now, in the past, in other sports, when you hear the term medical issues, not injury, it might just mean that he was sick. And it was like you talked about, that weather was kind of goofy. It's muggy today. Last week it was cold and rainy all week. So maybe he came down with a cold, maybe he caught the flu, something like that. So I just held him out because UMary, not a tough opponent. So you put in your backup quarterback, and they went on and got the dub. But the other thing too, the game got delayed by lightning. It was raining. It was tough conditions, very difficult conditions to play a football game. And I don't really remember if it rained all game. I was up here in the control room. You were down there though. Was it raining the whole game? Or?
Very beginning, it was downpouring, and then at the very beginning of the game, it was more like a pretty steady rain, and then after about like 30 minutes to an hour, it just started just like light drizzling.
Sure. So that turf field, it's probably better than being on grass in the rain, but it still gets slippery. The ball gets slippery, so it's tough to play a football game. And they came out and took it to them, even in tough conditions. And when you get a delay like that, they can sometimes mess with your mind. So. They did everything they needed to do despite the circumstances, and came away with a very convincing win.
Well, let's go off. We've been talking about Brown out with the whole medical condition kind of thing. Are we worried about there could be another injury, or I mean, from what we know, it doesn't sound like there was an injury, but what if there is it's a recurring injury?
Then we're in the same boat as we were last year, and a big question mark. And Henning captain this ship one more time to a decent season, or are we going to fall apart? But we got a pretty easy week this week, I think, to figure that out. Hopefully Brandon is back. We don't know, but we've got a pretty easy week to take care of that and fix these issues to figure out what's going on. So hopefully Brandon's okay, but if not, it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward.
Yeah, maybe they'll start Henning, which is actually his senior year. Do you think with how impressive his performance was last week, because he had 4 touchdowns, which ties the record with Brandon Alt for the most touchdowns in BSU in one game?
Since 2012.
Right. Do you think that Henning could get the starting position, or is this just a fluke?
If Brandon's healthy, he'll play, I think, for now. Until if Henning has to play against a tougher opponent and does the same thing, then you can talk. But until then, both quarterbacks have played against not great teams, so it's one of those where it's still up for grabs. I think it's Brandon's spot, assuming he's okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they had a pretty impressive running game actually in that game. What do you think about the running game? Is that a pretty big key to the offense here?
I've always been a believer in a run game opens up your pass game, and so to have a healthy football team, you need a run game because without a run game, the defense is going to key in on pass. But if you can establish a run, they have to work on the run, which opens things up downfield to make some bigger plays with the pass game. So it's very good to see them establishing that run game, and I knew they'd kind of have to with the weather conditions last week, and they did exactly what they needed to do. Special teams looked good, defense looked good, and every facet of offense looked very good, quite frankly, and they did what they're supposed to do. It was a weak opponent, but they did what a good team should do against a weak opponent and crushed them, so I'm happy with this week.
Yeah. All right, well, so their next game is going to be against UMD, which is the Bulldogs.
Crookston this week.
Crookston, I was going to say Crookston, my bad.
UMD,
and then the next week is going to be the Duluth, my bad.
Game,
so against Crookston, they just came from what we talked about before. They were a Division III school 2 years ago and now are Division II just last year. Should this be like an easy win?
I would say so, yes. I would almost bet any dollar in my bank account that they'll win this game. Last year it was a 69-0 game, if I remember right. So I think it'll be the same thing this year. It's going to be a couple of years before Crookston can really be competitive at the D2 level. That's just how it goes in college sports when you make a jump like that. You see that in high school too. When a high school moves up from 5A to 6A or whatever, it's going to be a tough couple of years for them until they start building up to it. Ultimately, it makes you better, but it's going to be a couple of years, and it's part of the learning curve. It's part of the process. So, Bemidji State should have no problem this weekend.
Yeah. Well, should we be concerned about BSU's penalties, though? Because, I mean, we were talking about this like a couple of weeks ago, just off camera, about penalties possibly can be an issue, especially playing against, even if it's Crookston, if they make all these mistakes and Crookston executes on those mistakes, then that could actually backfire on the BSU.
Well, or if once you get to a good team, you can't keep shooting yourself in the foot. Both games, they've shot themselves in the foot with over 100 yards penalties, I think.
Yeah.
That can't happen against a good team when you're trying to crunch out a win. We saw it last week with the Vikings. If any of you guys watched the Viking-Packer game on Sunday, the Vikings shot themselves in the foot so many times with those penalties and still almost had a chance to win. They didn't, and ultimately, if you take away some of those penalties, you have a better shot. And a couple of them took away a touchdown. So if Bemidji State does that I'm not worried about it with Crookston. I think Crookston's a team you could come out and have 100 penalty yards, but that's a habit they have to break because when you get to the next week when we play Duluth, who's ranked 13th right now, you cannot do that. You cannot shoot yourself in the foot that many times. So that's something they're going to have to fix, and they hopefully get it taken care of this week because that's what these weeks are for against these easier opponents. It's time to perfect your stuff for the tough opponents.
Yeah. Well, like how you talked about before, the schedule, especially we're starting off weak and going into a harder, possibly more harder games in the mid area of the schedule. Could this be possible reasons of being kicked out of the playoffs run?
Oh, it could be. Right now you're floating high. You're 3-0, or hopefully going to be 3-0. It's a really great thing. You're doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing, but now you're what you can't do is get in the mindset of, oh, we're really good. Look how bad we've beaten these teams. Well, in retrospect, you're not that good because now you're going to go play Duluth and get your butt handed to you. So you got to go out and prove to yourselves prove to everyone that you can beat those teams, and an easy schedule right away kind of builds up your confidence, but at the same time, it can allow you to get into that mindset of we can roll in anywhere and beat anybody.
Right, and then that could be bad because you can roll into UMD and then they tell you, no, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, it's not going to happen, and all of a sudden you're 3-6 and on your way home for the season, and it's not what you want. So it's something I wish they'd get some tougher opponents mixed in there, but it's just the way the schedule happens. They can't control it, so you can't worry about it. You can't worry about what you can't control. Control what you can control and take care of business.
All right, well, I think that's all we got for you guys this week. We'll see you guys next week.